Thank you for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you with us as we dive into today's captivating story. Kevin S. gripped a cold beer with his calloused hands, surveying his backyard where friends and family gathered, paper plates piled high with barbecue and potato salad. It was his 45th birthday, but something felt off. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the well-kept lawn as Kevin's steel blue eyes narrowed, landing on his wife Miranda. She laughed a little too loudly at something their neighbor, Noel Morrison, had said, her hand lingering on his arm just a moment too long. Kevin's jaw clenched. He'd known Miranda for 20 years and been married to her for 17. He could read her like a book, the way her eyes shifted when she was being dishonest, the slight tremble in her voice when she was hiding something. And right now, every instinct, sharpened by years of working in construction management, screamed that something was terribly wrong. He finished his beer and headed toward the cooler, nodding at acquaintances as he moved past. From the corner of his eye, he caught Miranda leaning closer to Noel, whispering something. Noel's hand brushed the small of her back, and Kevin's grip tightened around the neck of his new beer bottle. He wanted to storm over and demand answers, but no, not here, not now. He would deal with it later, once the guests were gone, when their 16-year-old son, Zach, wasn't there to witness whatever ugliness might unfold. Hey, Kevin, his co-worker Tom called out. Great party, man. How's it feel to be halfway to 90? Kevin forced a grin, replying, like I need another beer. You want one? As the evening wound down, Kevin found himself in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. Miranda entered, her cheeks flushed from wine and laughter. Need help, birthday boy? She asked playfully. Kevin stood up straight, his gaze hard. What's going on between you and Noel? Miranda's smile faltered briefly but then returned. What are you talking about? She said. Don't play dumb, Miranda. I saw you two whispering, touching. What's happening? Her eyes flashed with defiance, the facade of the perfect wife slipping away, revealing something cold beneath. He's been more of a husband to me than you ever were in 17 years, she spat, her words hitting Kevin like a punch. Before he could respond, a new voice cut in. Don't bother asking, Dad, Zach said from the doorway. He spent more nights here than you. Kevin turned, stunned, to see his son, his young face twisted in anger and pain. Zach's words hung in the air, heavy with betrayal. Zach, Miranda began softly. Honey, it's not what you think, but Zach wasn't having it. Save it, Mum. I'm not stupid. I've seen the texts. I've heard the calls. How could you do this to Dad? In that moment, Kevin's world shattered. The illusion of a happy marriage and a stable home crumbled. Rage surged within him, but when he spoke, his voice was calm, much calmer than he felt. Party's over, folks. Thanks for coming, but it's time to go. People began to file out, offering awkward goodbyes. But Noel, emboldened by alcohol, refused to leave. Come on, Kev, Noel slurred, swaying slightly. We're all friends here, right? Kevin ignored him and walked to the garage, his movements measured and deliberate. When he returned, he held a baseball bat. Noel's eyes widened, and he stumbled backward, almost tripping over himself in his hurry to get away. Kevin watched, bat in hand, as Noel bolted down the driveway and disappeared into the night. The remaining guests left in shocked silence, casting worried glances as they hurried to their cars. Alone now, Kevin sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly ahead. Miranda had stormed off to their bedroom, slamming the door, while Zach retreated to his room, leaving Kevin with nothing but his thoughts. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he pored over financial documents, bank statements, credit card bills. By dawn, as the first light of the sun filtered through the kitchen windows, Kevin had pieced together what had been happening under his nose. At around 9 a.m., Miranda stumbled into the kitchen, her hair a mess, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She went straight to the coffee pot, ignoring Kevin, until she finally gestured toward the papers spread across the table. What's all this? She asked. Kevin's voice was cold when he answered, divorce papers. I've already called my lawyer. Miranda's hangover seemed to vanish as fear flickered in her eyes, but then defiance took over. Her pretty features twisted into something harsh. You think it'll be that easy? She sneered. I'll take you for everything you're worth. Don't count on it, Kevin replied, sliding over a stack of financial records. I've been tracking your little errands. And Noel's sudden influx of cash. That's embezzlement, Miranda. It's a serious crime. The color drained from Miranda's face, but she quickly masked her fear. You can't prove anything, she shot back. Kevin smiled, a sharp, predatory grin. Watch me. Before Miranda could respond, the front door slammed open, and Noel stormed into the kitchen, his face flushed with anger. You threatening Miranda, Kevin, he growled. Big mistake. Kevin remained calm, squaring his shoulders. The mistake was yours, Noel. Both of you. Noel lunged, throwing a wild punch, but Kevin, hardened by years of physical labor, easily deflected it, twisting Noel's arm behind his back and forcing him to his knees. "Listen carefully," Kevin said, his voice low and steady. "I have evidence of your scheme. You've got one chance to confess, or I'm taking it all to the cops." From the doorway, Miranda watched, finally grasping the gravity of the situation. She had risked everything: her marriage, her home, on the excitement and wealth Noel had promised. Now, she realized just how badly she had miscalculated. Kevin released Noel, who scrambled to his feet, rubbing his arm. The tension in the air was palpable as the two men stared at each other. "You have 24 hours, Kevin said. After that, I'm making calls to the police, to your boss, to everyone." Noel, panic in his eyes, glanced at Miranda, then bolted from the house without another word. In the silence that followed, Kevin turned to his wife, the woman he had once loved and trusted. Now he felt nothing but disdain. "I want you out by tomorrow," he said quietly. "Go stay with your sister, or with Noel. I don't care. But you're not staying here." Miranda's voice was small as she asked, "What about Zach?" "Zach stays with me," Kevin responded firmly. "Unless you want to explain to a judge why an embezzler and adulterer should have custody defeated." Miranda's shoulders slumped. Without saying another word, she turned and walked upstairs to begin packing her things. Kevin remained at the kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence of his wife's betrayal. He felt drained, but oddly, a sense of relief washed over him. The truth was out now. He heard footsteps on the stairs and glanced up to see Zach enter the kitchen, his eyes rimmed with red, his face pale. Without a word, Kevin stood and pulled his son into a tight hug. As they stood in the kitchen, the morning light streaming through the windows, Kevin felt a spark of hope. His marriage was shattered, his trust obliterated, but he still had his son. He still had his integrity, and now he had the truth. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on, just as he always had. Kevin's mind raced, trying to process the events of the last 24 hours. He needed a plan, a way to shield himself and Zach from the fallout of Miranda and Noel's deceit. "Zach," he said gently but firmly, "I need you to tell me everything you know. When did this start? What have you seen or heard?" Zach sank into a kitchen chair, the movement so much like Kevin's own that it made his heart ache. "It's been going on for months, Dad. At least 6, maybe longer. I started noticing small things at first, Mum always on her phone, laughing at texts. Then one night I overheard a call while you were working late." Kevin nodded, encouraging his son to keep going. "She was talking about money, about being careful. I didn't get it at first, but then I saw Noel leaving early one morning when you were out of town for that big project in Roanoke." Kevin's fists clenched at his sides, but his voice remained calm. "You did the right thing, son. I know it wasn't easy keeping this to yourself." Zach looked up, tears welling in his eyes. "I wanted to tell you, Dad, I really did. But Mum said it would destroy you, destroy the family. She said it was just a phase, that it'd be over soon." Kevin placed a hand on Zach's shoulder and squeezed gently. "None of this is your fault, Zach. Your mother and Noel made their choices. We're going to get through this, together." "All right," Zach nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "What happens now?" Kevin sighed, looking at the pile of papers on the table. "Now, we protect ourselves. I'm calling the lawyer again to get the divorce started. We might have to involve the police over the embezzlement. But first, I need you to do something for me." Zach sat up straighter. "Anything, Dad. I need you to write down everything you remember, dates, times, conversations you overheard. Anything that might help." "Can you do that?" Zach's face hardened with determination. "I can do that. I want to help." Kevin managed a faint smile. "That's my boy. Now head upstairs and get started on that while I make a few calls." As Zach went upstairs, Kevin pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. Waiting for an answer, he stared out the window. "Stanley. It's Kevin. We need to talk. There's been a situation, and it might affect the company. Can you meet me at the office in an hour?" After hanging up, Kevin took a deep breath. The remnants of his birthday party were still scattered around the kitchen, but it felt like it had happened a lifetime ago. Upstairs, he could hear Miranda packing, moving about the house. Part of him wanted to confront her again, demand answers, make her feel just a fraction of the pain he was enduring. But he knew it was pointless. She had made her choice. Instead, Kevin focused on what needed to be done. He gathered the financial records, stacking them neatly in his briefcase, and then headed upstairs to change. As he passed the guest room, he saw Miranda stuffing clothes into a suitcase. She looked up when he paused in the doorway, her eyes swollen and red. "Kevin, please," she began, her voice shaking. "Can't we talk about this? 17 years of marriage has to mean something. A surge of anger rose in Kevin, but he pushed it down. His voice was cold and measured when he spoke. "You're right, Miranda. 17 years does mean something. It means alimony and how the judge will see your infidelity and embezzlement. Beyond that, it means nothing." Miranda flinched as if he'd slapped her. "You don't mean that. We can fix this. I made a mistake, but I love you. I love our family." Kevin laughed bitterly. "Love? Is that what you call what you've done with our neighbor? Or stealing from my company? Save your lies, Miranda. I'm not interested." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "What about Zach? Are you really going to turn his mother into a criminal? Is that what's best for him?" Kevin spun around, his eyes blazing with fury. "Don't you dare use Zach as a shield. You didn't think about him when you were screwing Noel in our bed. You didn't consider him when you were stealing money that could have sent him to college. You don't get to play the concerned mother now." Miranda recoiled, tears streaming down her face, but Kevin felt nothing for her. His own tears had been shed in the darkness the night before. Now he was beyond sorrow. He was enraged. "I'm going to the office," he said icily. "I expect you to be gone when I get back. If you need more time, come tomorrow while I'm at work. But as of now, you no longer live here." Without waiting for a response, Kevin walked away. He stopped by Zach's room and knocked softly on the door. "Come in," Zach called. Kevin opened the door to find his son at his desk, scribbling notes. "I'm heading to the office for a bit." "You going to be okay here by yourself?" Zach nodded, looking up. "Yeah, Dad. I'll be fine. Are you okay?" Kevin managed a faint smile. "I will be, son. We both will be. It's going to be rough for a while, but we'll get through it." Zach stood and hugged his father tightly. Kevin returned the embrace, feeling a lump rise in his throat. When they pulled apart, both their eyes were moist. "I'll be back soon," Kevin said, ruffling Zach's hair. "Call me if you need anything, all right?" As Kevin drove to the office, his mind already churned with the next steps. He'd need to lock down the company's finances, ensuring Miranda couldn't access any more funds. He'd have to start documenting everything for the divorce. And he'd need to figure out how to move forward, how to rebuild his life from the wreckage of betrayal. It wouldn't be easy, but Kevin Sawyer had never backed down from hard work. He had built his career from the ground up, climbing from apprentice to foreman to project manager. He'd tackle this challenge just like he always did head-on, with grit and resolve. As he pulled into the office parking lot, Kevin inhaled deeply. The man who had walked into his birthday celebration yesterday no longer existed. That man was gone, along with the life he'd believed in. But in his place stood someone stronger, someone who wouldn't be deceived again. Someone ready to fight for what was his and for the future. Kevin grabbed his briefcase, straightened his posture, and strode into the building. The fight was only beginning. Kevin Sawyer stepped onto the construction site, the familiar sense of sawdust and concrete filling his lungs. It provided a welcome distraction from the turmoil in his personal life. Here he had control, or so he thought. "Sawyer," a voice called out. Kevin turned to see Stanley Humphrey, the company's owner, walking toward him, worry etched into his features. "We've got a problem," Stanley said, cutting straight to the point. "Bullock Construction is suing us. They're claiming we stole their proprietary designs for the Riverside project." Kevin's stomach sank. The Riverside project was their biggest contract to date, and losing it would spell disaster for the company. As the project manager, the blame would fall directly on him. "That's impossible," Kevin said, his mind racing. "We developed those designs in-house. I oversaw the entire process." Stanley nodded gravely. "I know, and you know that. But Bullock's got some convincing evidence. If we can't disprove their claims, we're looking at a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, and that's not even counting the damage to our reputation." Kevin clenched his jaw. He wasn't about to let this company, his company, go under because of a baseless accusation. "Get me everything we have on Bullock and this lawsuit," he said. "I'll get to the bottom of this." As Stanley walked away, Kevin's phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. "We need to talk about the divorce, the house," and Zach. Kevin didn't bother replying. There were bigger issues to handle. In the following days, Kevin buried himself in research on Bullock Construction and its CEO, Francisco Bullock. He sifted through financial statements, court records, and industry rumors. Gradually, a pattern emerged. Francisco Bullock had a history of filing frivolous lawsuits. Kevin found case after case where Bullock had sued smaller companies, usually settling out of court for substantial payouts. It wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a tactic, a business strategy masked as legal action. Kevin's research led him to an even more startling discovery. Bullock Construction was in financial trouble. Their recent projects had gone over budget, and they were hemorrhaging money. This lawsuit wasn't just about the designs, it was a last-ditch effort to stay afloat. Kevin allowed himself a grim smile as he pieced everything together. Bullock had targeted the wrong company this time. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Miranda and Noel were having a very different conversation. "We need to act fast," Miranda hissed, pacing in Noel's cramped apartment. "Kevin's going to take everything in the divorce. We need to undermine him." Noel lounged on the couch, seemingly unbothered. "Relax, babe. We've got the embezzlement angle. He can't prove anything without getting himself caught." Miranda shot him a sharp look. "You don't know Kevin like I do. He's not going to back down. We need to hit him where it hurts his job." A slow grin spread across Noel's face. "I think I might have just the thing." The next day, Miranda walked confidently into S Construction's main office, ignoring the whispers from employees who recognized her as Kevin's wife or ex-wife, as she now had to remind herself. "I need to see Stanley Humphrey. It's urgent," she told the receptionist. 10 minutes later, she sat across from Stanley, her expression carefully crafted to show concern. "I'm worried about Kevin," she began, her voice trembling just enough. "He's been unstable lately, drinking too much, flying off the handle." Stanley frowned. "That doesn't sound like Kevin." Miranda leaned in, her eyes wide with fake worry. "I know, that's why I'm so scared. The stress of the job is getting to him. I'm afraid he might do something drastic." As she spun her story, Miranda could see the doubt creeping into Stanley's mind. It wasn't much, but it was a start. At the same time, Noel was enacting his own scheme. He had managed to get his hands on a set of keys to the construction site office. Under cover of night, he slipped inside. His target was Kevin's computer. If he could plant incriminating documents, maybe some fake correspondence with Bullock Construction, it would cast doubt on Kevin's innocence in the lawsuit. Noel booted up the computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. But as he tried to access Kevin's files, he hit a roadblock: extra security measures that he hadn't expected. After several failed attempts, he was forced to leave, frustrated and empty-handed. What Noel didn't know was that Kevin had anticipated some form of sabotage. He had bolstered the security on all his work devices. As Noel crept out of the office, a silent alert pinged on Kevin's phone, along with a clear image from the hidden camera he had installed. Kevin allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Let them play their games, he was collecting all the evidence he needed. The following week, Kevin stood before the company's legal team, his research spread out on the table. "Gentlemen," he began, "I think you'll find this interesting." Over the next hour, Kevin laid out everything he had uncovered about Francisco Bullock and his company, the pattern of frivolous lawsuits, the financial troubles, and the desperate need for a big payout. "And here's the kicker," Kevin said, pulling out one last document. "I found evidence of unethical practices at Bullock Construction Corners, cut on safety measures, substandard materials used to cut costs. If this gets out, it'll ruin their reputation in the industry." The lead lawyer leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "This is fantastic work, Kevin. Not only can we defend against their lawsuit, but we might even counter-sue for defamation." As Kevin left the meeting, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had done it, he'd saved the company and his job. But his relief was short-lived. As he approached his car, he spotted a familiar figure lurking by the entrance. Noel. Kevin's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wouldn't give Noel the satisfaction of seeing him lose his composure. "What are you doing here?" Kevin asked coolly. Noel smirked, though Kevin could see the nervousness in his eyes. "Just passing by. Thought I'd say hi to an old friend." "We're not friends," Kevin said flatly, "and if I catch you near this site again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Noel's smirk faded slightly. "You've got nothing on us, Sawyer. You can't prove anything." Kevin leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. "I've got more than you think. Now get out of here before I decide to share some of that information with the police." As Noel hurried away, Kevin indulged in a brief moment of satisfaction. He was winning this fight on every front. The following day, the news broke Francisco Bullock had been arrested on charges of fraud and safety violations. S Construction's countersuit had exposed all of Bullock's wrongdoings. In the aftermath, Kevin found himself back in Stanley's office, but this time the older man was smiling. "You've done an incredible job," Kevin Stanley said with admiration. "You saved the company from what could have been a catastrophic lawsuit, and in doing so you demonstrated leadership qualities I didn't even know you had." Kevin nodded, accepting the praise. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." Stanley leaned forward, his expression turning more serious. "I think we need to talk about your future here. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility?" "Say, as Vice President of Operations. Pride surged through Kevin. This was the promotion he had been working toward for years. "I'd be honored, sir." As Kevin left Stanley's office, his new title ringing in his ears, he couldn't help but feel triumphant. He had tackled challenges both at work and at home and had come out on top. But as he drove home, his thoughts drifted to Miranda and Noel. They had been unusually quiet lately, too quiet. Kevin knew them well enough to understand they wouldn't give up easily. They were probably planning something desperate. Fine, let them try, Kevin thought. He was prepared for whatever they might throw his way next. When he pulled into his driveway, Kevin saw Zach sitting on the front porch, waiting for him. The sight of his son brought a genuine smile to his face. No matter what happened with Miranda and Noel, or at work, he had Zach, and that was what truly mattered. Kevin got out of the car, eager to share his good news with his son. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. Meanwhile, across town in Noel's shabby apartment, Miranda was pacing furiously. Her face was twisted in anger. "Did you see the news?" she spat. "That bastard not only beat the lawsuit, but he got Francisco arrested and now he's been promoted." Noel, who usually wore a smug expression, sat on the couch with a scowl. "Calm down, babe. We'll figure something out." Miranda whipped around, her eyes blazing. "Calm down? We're losing everything, Noel. The money, the house, my son, and you want me to calm down?" Noel got up and grabbed her arms. "Listen to me. We're not done yet. We still have one last card to play." Miranda looked at him, a mix of desperation and hope flickering in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Noel's grin was malicious. "We're going to make Kevin look like the bad guy, and I've got just the plan to do it." As Noel explained his scheme, a chill crept down Miranda's spine. It was a risky plan, dangerous even, but they were running out of options. Kevin had outsmarted them at every turn, and this was their last chance to turn the tables. "All right," Miranda said finally. "Let's do it." As the sun set over the city, three people prepared for the battles ahead. Kevin, confident yet cautious, ready to defend what was his, and Miranda and Noel, desperate and dangerous, prepared to gamble everything on one final move. The stage was set for a confrontation that would alter all of their lives forever. Noel paced the dingy living room of his apartment, his face tense with worry. The cheap laminate floors creaked under his feet as he walked back and forth. Miranda sat on the worn-out couch, her once perfect nails now chipped and broken. They had been scheming for hours, fueled by cheap whiskey and even cheaper promises. "It has to be flawless," Noel muttered. "One mistake and we're finished." Miranda's gaze was hard. "Kevin's smart. He'll be expecting something." Noel sneered. "Yeah, but he won't see this coming." His lips curled into a sinister grin. "You remember the plan?" "Of course I do," Miranda snapped. "I'm not stupid." Noel stopped pacing and shot her a hard look. "Could have fooled me. If you hadn't been so reckless with the embezzlement." "Don't you dare pin this all on me," Miranda hissed, standing up. "You were happy enough to take the money when it was rolling in." Noel waved her off dismissively. "That's water under the bridge. We need to focus on what's next." The plan was simple: frame Kevin for assault. Noel would rough himself up and Miranda would back up the story. Kevin would end up with a criminal record, his new cushy job gone, and he'd lose any leverage in the divorce. "You sure you can pull this off?" Noel asked, eyeing Miranda skeptically. Miranda's laugh was bitter. "Please. I've been acting like the loving wife for years. This will be easy." What they didn't know was that Kevin was already several steps ahead. In his home office, surrounded by screens, Kevin had been monitoring their every move. Weeks earlier, he had installed hidden cameras around the house, a precaution developed from years of dealing with shady contractors and even shadier lawyers. Now, those cameras were his trump card. He watched as Noel stumbled into view, with Miranda following closely behind. They were arguing, though their voices were muffled. Their body language was unmistakable. Kevin leaned closer as Noel began hitting himself, fabricating bruises that would later be blamed on him. "Amateurs," Kevin muttered, a grim smile forming on his face. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Jack? It's Kevin. I think it's time to put our plan into motion." The next day, Kevin wasn't surprised to see two police officers at his door. What did catch him off guard was the sight of Zach standing behind them, his young face filled with confusion and fear. "Mr. Sawyer," one of the officers said in a professional tone, "we need to ask you some questions about an alleged assault." Kevin nodded calmly and stepped aside. "Of course, officers. I've been expecting you." As they sat in the living room, Kevin made eye contact with Zach and said softly, "It's okay, son. This will all be over soon." The interrogation was brief but intense. The officers relayed Noel's version of events, a supposed unprovoked attack, backed by Miranda's tearful testimony. Kevin listened silently, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Sawyer," the lead officer said, "Mr. Morrison claims you assaulted him last night. He has the injuries to back it up, and your wife has corroborated his account. Do you have anything to say?" Kevin leaned forward, his voice calm and measured. "Officers, I appreciate you doing your job, but there's something I think you should see." He led them to his office, Zach trailing behind. With a few keystrokes, the screens lit up, displaying crystal clear footage of Noel and Miranda's clumsy attempt at setting him up. The officers watched in stunned silence. When the video ended, the lead officer turned to Kevin. "Mr. Sawyer," he said, his tone respectful, "I think we owe you an apology." Kevin dismissed their concern. "No need, you were just doing your job. But I would like to press charges against Mr. Morrison and my soon-to-be ex-wife for filing a false report." As the officers left, promising to return with a warrant, Zach looked at his father with a blend of admiration and respect. "Dad, that was. How did you know?" Kevin placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I've learned to always be ready, Zach, especially when dealing with people like your mother and Noel." "But the cameras," Zach said, hesitant. "Isn't that like an invasion of privacy or something?" Kevin sighed. "It's my house, son. And considering what they were plotting, I'd say it was justified. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire." Across town, Miranda and Noel were celebrating their supposed victory with cheap champagne when the doorbell rang. Their smiles vanished as they opened the door to find not only the police but Kevin himself, flanked by his lawyer. "What's going on?" Miranda demanded, her voice sharp. Kevin's smile was cold. "Justice, Miranda. Plain and simple." As the officers read Miranda and Noel their rights, Kevin's lawyer stepped forward with a thick folder. "Mr. Sawyer has some matters he'd like to discuss with you both." Inside, Kevin methodically laid out the evidence, camera footage, bank statements showing the stolen funds, and emails revealing their conspiracies. With each new piece of incriminating information, Miranda and Noel seemed to shrink, their confidence quickly eroding. "You've got nothing," Noel sneered, though his voice wavered. Kevin calmly pulled out a USB drive. "This contains everything. Every transaction, every lie, every scheme. You have two choices: confess and deal with the consequences, or I take this straight to the authorities." Miranda, who had remained silent until now, suddenly broke down. "Kevin, please," she sobbed. "We can fix this, for Zach's sake." Kevin's eyes hardened. "Don't you dare use our son as an excuse, Miranda. You gave up that right when you chose to betray us both." "But he needs his mother," Miranda cried. "He needs stability." "Stability and honesty," Kevin retorted. "Two things you clearly can't provide." Seeing the inevitable, Noel quickly shifted blame. "It was all her idea," he blurted. "She came to me, told me she was unhappy. I never wanted it to go this far." Miranda's tears turned to fury. "You liar. After everything we've been through, you're throwing me under the bus." Enough, Kevin's voice cut through their bickering. "You're both going down for this. The only thing left to decide is how hard." As Miranda and Noel turned on each other, Kevin stood and nodded to the officers. "I think we're done here," he said calmly. "They're all yours." In the weeks that followed, the truth came out in a very public way. Noel was arrested for embezzlement, his reputation irreparably destroyed. Miranda, facing the consequences of her betrayal, lost any claim to custody of Zach and forfeited any rights to Kevin's assets. Kevin found himself in another meeting with Stanley Humphrey, the owner of the company. Stanley leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased. "Kevin, I've got to hand it to you," he said. "The way you handled the Bullock lawsuit was impressive enough, but the grace you've shown under personal pressure, that's the kind of strength we need in top leadership." Kevin raised an eyebrow. "What are you saying, Stanley?" "I'm saying, how would you like to be our new Chief Operations Officer? Corner office, substantial pay raise, the works." Kevin felt a surge of pride but kept his face neutral. "I'd be honored, Stanley. Thank you for the opportunity." As he left Stanley's office, Kevin allowed himself a small smile. He had weathered both personal and professional storms and come out stronger. But what gave him the most satisfaction wasn't the promotion or the accolades, it was the bond he had forged with Zach. He and his son grew closer than ever, spending evenings together sharing meals and having long talks on the porch. One evening, as they watched the sunset, Zach turned to his father. "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Mom and Noel sooner." Kevin gently placed a hand on Zach's shoulder, giving it a squeeze. "You did the right thing in the end, Zach. That's what matters." Zach was quiet for a moment before asking, "Do you think Mum will ever change?" Kevin sighed, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know, son. People can change, but they have to want to. Your Mum. She's got a lot of work to do." "Are you still mad at her?" Kevin thought for a moment. "I was, at first. Now I'm just disappointed. But that's not something you need to worry about. Your job is to focus on school, your friends, and growing into the best person you can be." Zach nodded, then surprised Kevin by leaning in for a hug. "Thanks, Dad, for everything." As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in warm shades of orange and pink, Kevin felt a deep sense of contentment. He had faced betrayal with resilience, met challenges with wisdom, and emerged not only victorious but respected. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations with Zach, therapy sessions to process the emotional scars, and a divorce that would drag on as a constant reminder of what had been lost. But as Kevin sat with his son, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had survived the storm and emerged stronger. The next morning, Kevin woke early, his mind already buzzing with the day's plans. As he made coffee, Zach shuffled into the kitchen, still bleary-eyed and yawning. "Morning," Chump Kevin said, sliding a plate of toast across the counter. "Sleep okay?" Zach shrugged. "I guess. Had some weird dreams." Kevin nodded in understanding. "Want to talk about it?" For a moment it looked like Zach would brush it off, but then he began speaking hesitantly. "I dreamed about Mom. She was crying, saying she was sorry. Then she turned into this monster, and Noel was there, laughing." Kevin set his coffee down and gave Zach his full attention. "That sounds intense. How did it make you feel?" "I don't know," Zach muttered. "Scared." Angry, he pushed his toast around on the plate. "Do you think I'll ever be able to trust Mum again?" Kevin took a deep breath. It was the kind of conversation he had been bracing for, but it still wasn't easy. "That's up to you, Zach. Trust has to be earned, not given. If your mum wants to regain that trust, she'll have to work for it. But you're not obligated to give her that chance if you're not ready." Zach nodded slowly. I think I need more time. Is that okay?" "Of course it is." Kevin reassured him, "Take all the time you need, and remember, I'm always here if you want to talk." As Zach headed off to school, Kevin was filled with both pride and sadness. His son was maturing far faster than he had expected, forced to face adult problems much too early. But Zach was handling it with a level of maturity that deeply impressed him. Later that day, Kevin was in his new corner office, going over the quarterly reports when a knock on the door broke his concentration. "Come in," he called out. To his surprise, it was Miranda who stepped inside. She looked different, thinner, paler, with dark shadows under her eyes. The confident, polished woman he had married seemed to have vanished. "Kevin," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I need to talk to you." Kevin leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I thought my lawyer made it clear that all communication needs to go through him." Miranda nodded, wringing her hands nervously. I know, but this isn't about the divorce or anything legal. It's about Zach." Despite himself, Kevin felt a spark of concern. "What about Zach?" "I want to see him," Miranda said quickly, as if afraid she might lose her resolve. "I know I don't have any right to ask, but he's my son, Kevin. I miss him." Kevin remained silent for a long moment, studying her. Finally he spoke. "You're right, you don't have the right to ask. But Zach is old enough to make his own choices. If he wants to see you, I won't stop him." Miranda's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Kevin. I know I don't deserve." "You're right, you don't," Kevin interrupted, his tone sharp. "But this isn't about you or me. It's about what's best for Zach. I'll talk to him, see how he feels. That's all I can promise." Miranda nodded, a mixture of gratitude and shame on her face. As she turned to leave, Kevin called out Miranda. She paused, looking back at him. "Get help," Kevin said simply. "For Zach's sake, if not your own." After she left, Kevin sat back in his chair, lost in thought. He meant what he had said. This was Zach's decision to make, but he couldn't shake the swirl of emotions inside him. Anger at Miranda's nerve, concern for Zach's well-being, and buried deep within, a small glimmer of hope. Not for reconciliation that ship had sailed, but for healing for all of them. As the day drew to a close, Kevin packed up and headed home. The house was quiet when he arrived, with Zach still out at his after-school activities. Kevin took advantage of the time to start preparing dinner, falling into the familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables and seasoning the meat. When Zach returned, they sat down to eat, exchanging stories about their day. Kevin waited until they were almost finished before bringing up Miranda's visit. "Your mum came to see me today," he said carefully, watching Zach's reaction. Zach's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Oh," he said quietly. "What did she want?" Kevin took a breath. "She wants to see you. But I told her it's your choice. You don't have to, if you're not ready." Zach sat silently for a long time, moving the food around on his plate. Finally, he looked up. "Can I think about it?"
Of course, Kevin replied, his relief showing in his voice. "Take as much time as you need. There's no rush."
Later that night, as Kevin lay in bed, he reflected on everything that had happened during the day. The challenges weren't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in months, it felt like they were moving forward instead of just staying afloat. Whatever came next, he and Zach would face it together. And that, Kevin realized, was what truly mattered. This is where our story concludes. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I'll see you there.